Okay, so that's the kind of the overall summation of it. What are the things that are highlighted to illustrate the blessing that he received?
His property.
Okay, so one aspect is his property. What's another aspect?
7 sons, that was considered an ideal number.
Okay, so his children. And what else?
His daughters were the fairest of all.
Well, that's what's said later on.
Right.
That's right, at the very end. But here, there's something else that is mentioned. We've already talked about it, but I think it's a slightly different dimension to what we've just mentioned.
The offerings that he made.
Okay. Those are some of his practices, but we're now talking about the way in which God has blessed him. There's another way in which God has blessed him. Property, children, something else. It may not be quite as obvious. What's involved in being the greatest man of the East? It's not just his property.
His reputation.
And as a result of his reputation,
Livestock.
if we've read the book, we'll know that at certain points Job alludes to John.
God's Word translation says he was the most influential person in the Middle East.
All right, so that's getting warmer. So what's involved is in his being influential. As a result of being influential, what was true of him?
I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but people respected him.
Yes, I mean he had status. He had high status. He was regarded and respected. He was influential, as you said. He had this strong reputation. So he had those 3 dimensions. Let's look at that quickly. So here are the elements that are described. I just thought it was interesting. They did this. I wanted to see what this would look like in modern day terms. So I did my best to understand what the current value of a sheep is. I realize there's different kinds of sheep, there's ages and sizes, and male and female, and all that. But still, $350 a sheep seems to be roughly the going rate here in Texas. Camels, we don't really deal much in camels over here, but apparently an average camel is around $700. Camels can be really expensive, apparently. And then yokes of oxen. A yoke is what? How many oxen? 2. So 2 beefy oxen, that's a couple of $1,000 a piece. Female donkeys, surprisingly. I mean, I was thinking of buying a donkey not too long ago for keeping the hogs out of the cow pastures. I didn't realize how much donkeys actually cost. They're quite expensive. And then very many servants. Interesting to go back to Leviticus and work out the value of a servant as part of an exchange of property according to the old law. And of course, this law of Leviticus came after Job, but not too long after Job, maybe 100 years after Job. It was 30 to 50 shekels depending on male or female. Age was also a factor in the value. It apparently worked out to roughly 4 months' labor. Was the value of a servant. And just interesting that Abraham had 318 trained armed servants out of all of his servants. So he likely had more than 318. Anyway, at 4 months labor, I'm just kind of putting $15,000 there as kind of an average amount. So we can price out his net worth here was very significant in today's numbers, much less then. I mean, virtually everyone would have had only perhaps a few animals and maybe a very simple dwelling, if that, to count as their own property. Perhaps, some items of clothing, but very little, very, very little. And today's value may be approaching $10 million of net value. So he'd be a rich man by our standards, is what I'm trying to say. Even though we look at this as just animals, these are very significant. And it indicates, potentially that he had land that he plowed and probably grew crops as well. Rich man. Okay. Before we get into this, what about children? We're going to look at his concern for his children, but why are the children part of the blessing here? What?
They're his legacy, and he is concerned about their spiritual life, and so he is constantly offering sacrifice on their behalf.
Okay, we'll come back to these sacrifice practices. Someone likes to turn to Psalm 127 and verse 3. This is the Bible principle, I think, that we really need to just remember. And I want to make a point about this in just a second.
Verse 3.
Yes, please.
For there our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, Sing us the songs of Zion. You said
127 verse 3.
127.
Did I get the wrong?
I think you said 137.
Did I say 137? I'm so sorry.
127.
Yes, please.
Behold, children are like a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is his reward.
Okay. So, one of the ideas of what Mark was talking about being a heritage, being the kind of, and the descendants who would be a blessing and reflect his character and his name. The other is what? What's the other thought in that verse?
Arrows in the quiver of a warrior.
A reward. Blessing and a reward. It just occurred to me, just think about this for a minute. I would suggest that second only to the idea of trampling the Son of God underfoot and throwing back a blessing in the face of God, when men and women choose to abort babies,
Amen.
they're throwing back a blessing and a reward in the face of God. A vile, disgusting act, separate and apart from the murder of innocents, is the insult to God for his blessing and his reward that they're being given. But anyway, here we are. This is seven sons, 3 daughters, a blessing and a reward. He's blessed in every way. So let's look at his concern for his children. Well, actually, let me just ask this other question. Why is it going to be important to the story that, when I say story in these classes, I'm not talking about a fictional account. I'm just talking about if we were asked to tell our life story, we would talk about what actually happened. And that's what we're going to say with Job. It's what actually happened. We're just using that word story to mean the account of what actually happened. So why is all this blessing? The children, the property, and status. Why is it all going to be important to this story?
Because they're all taken away.
Okay. It's going to be taken away, and as a result of it being taken away, what's going to happen?
Testing them.
Okay, Job's going to be tested. Some other things are going to happen.
His friends will ridicule him. His friends will ridicule his supposed friends will ridicule him.
Yeah, and what,
This accusation from the devil will be answered.
okay. Yes. Well, what we're really saying is that as a result of losing these things, Job is going to interpret things a certain way. And the friends are going to interpret things a certain way. And so the book, another theme of the book is how we as human beings are going to interpret loss. And I'll tell you, I've been wrestling with this myself personally over the last 2 years as Beth was. Wrestling with loss. Many of you will have wrestled with loss. This book is going to help us with wrestling with loss, because it's how we interpret loss, and sometimes how we're interpreting loss in the face of how others around us are interpreting it, and creating issues for us in our own interpretation. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why it's going to be important. Okay, so let's talk about his concern for his children. What was his concern for his children?
He was concerned that they had sinned.
Yes, he was. He was concerned that they had sinned. And how specifically was he concerned that they might have sinned?
They were a party bunch.
Okay. Well, potentially. I think it's possible that they were. I think we shouldn't necessarily assume they were, because the feasting, could have been within limits and under control. But I will agree with you, there's a hint that maybe there
Several
was.
translations do use the word party.
Yes. I think that's unfortunate because there's no real justification for that, but still. What is the main concern?
It seems to be a secret sin that they first got in their hearts. Something
Yes.
other people he might not know, or they might not hear.
How does this idea of custom in their hearts translate back to his integrity, his holiness?
It's deep, and so it's not superficial.
Right.
Others could not charge him with hypocrisy, and just his integrity is something that he is holding himself to, and he wants his influence to be felt with his children.
I think it does, yes. I think really the main issue is though that he understands the principle that sin isn't just something that is done outwardly. Sin could be an inward matter of the heart. He recognizes that principle, and he is worried about his own children's behavior in their hearts, which I find really interesting. That is the sign to me of integrity, when we're examining our own hearts or we're thinking about the hearts of others. And clearly Job is a man who is dedicated to God, likely more dedicated to God than his children were, in the sense that he was ready to do this on their behalf. What was the way in which he sacrificed? There's a particular kind of thing about this. It's very interesting. What was a little unusual about the way he did this sacrifice?
Early in the morning.
Not so much that, I don't think.
Burnt offering for each one of them.
Okay, for each one of them.
You're looking at the word continually?
What's that?
Are you looking at that
Well,
word?
I think that's a very important point. Yes, we're going to come on to that, but yes. Well, let's put it this way. He doesn't know whether they've sinned or not, does he? So what's he doing? What's that?
He's covering his bases. He wants to
Yeah,
make sure.
and we might say he's acting preemptively. He's getting in front of it just in case. He's making provisions without actually knowing whether they sin. So it's a precautionary type of way, and he's doing what? In order to these burnt offerings have a particular purpose. What is that purpose?
Consecration.
Yeah. And what does that mean? Yeah. Dedicating them back to God, recognizing them that they are a holy blessing and reward from God, dedicating them, consecrating them back to God. Okay. Yes.
I think it's really interesting that one of the first pictures we get of Job, part of this whole introductory picture, is that he's being so careful. I mean, like you said, we don't know that they've sinned. It says Job is reasoning kind of with himself, saying, "It may be that my children have sinned." He doesn't even know. He's going the extra mile, if you will. He's being really, really cautious. And maybe this is just me, but it seems like when I read the first part of Job, these first 2 chapters, there's a part of me that says, man, he is not quite relatable yet. He's so pious and he's so good, and when I have bad things happen to me, that's not always my attitude, right? And when we get to chapter 3, I think the dynamic changes a little bit, because then the walls come crashing down and he says, curse the day of my birth, and we really just, the floodgates come out. And we're able to, I think, maybe a little bit more empathize with what Job is feeling. And, but here it's just, I think it's really interesting that we don't get that picture yet. The first picture we get is this really cautious depiction of Job.
And I believe that what we're really seeing is different aspects of what God has already said about Job. God has laid out the integrity of this man, and now here's some illustrations of that integrity. But I think you're right. We're going to see that that Job is not perfect, and there are some. He is like us in many ways, emotionally, and so we're going to see some of that in a second. One thing about this idea of he fears that they may have sinned and cursed God in their heart. Did anyone look at the word?
This is not related to this particular thing, but as we open the scene, as we get into Job, we're going to see a average Joe guy that that feels those pains, that feels the things that we feel, and yet he was able to keep himself together and not curse or charge God with wrong.
We'll certainly see a lot of examples of that. Anyone look into this word of cursed?
Do you mean the fact that it's the same word as blessed?
Yes. I find that very interesting. So, thought about this quite a bit and looked at different parts of this book. But it does appear that it's a kind of almost sarcastic use of the word bless. It's what you might call as a euphemistic word, euphemism word. It's kind of standing in for something else. Because they're doing it, they're speaking evil in their hearts. They're cursing God in their hearts. It suggests that there's something bad going on here. So it's very interesting, and it's not the only place where this double word, blessing and cursing, is actually used. It's actually always the word blessed, and it's being rendered cursed based on the context.
In the movie Sister Act, Whoopi Goldberg is getting chased by these assassins that are trying to kill her. And there's a big thing at the end where the police finally catch him, and she's looking at him and she's fixing to say a profanity probably. And one of the other sisters says, calls her down and she says, "Bless you." I figured that's what that word is.
And I think we're going to see an example of this in just a little bit.
Bless your heart.
We'll look more at the word and the meaning in just another setting shortly. So this concern that Job had about his children potentially cursing God in their hearts, why is this concern going to be important to the story?
I think maybe part of it is that we're going to see Job learn about God through this whole process. They're going to have a big discussion between the three of them, and then later Elihu. And then God's going to show up himself, and he's going to honor Job's request that he get some answers. And he's going to tell him. He's going to have this conversation with Job and say, "Where were you?"
Well, certainly that's all true, but it's very specifically about this idea of cursing. It's fearful that they can curse.
He may feel like he may have concern about their souls for God.
Certainly, I believe he does. Definitely that. I think he has a fatherly godly concern for their well-being, their relationship with God. But there's something about the overall context of this book, what it's about, that I think connects to this idea of his fear that they were going to curse God.
His wife is going to call upon him to curse God and die. And essentially, that's what Satan is doing. It's the character of Satan. He, and you talk about him, the sons of God, coming before God. Satan was once a son of God, and he has rejected, rebelled, cursed God.
Thank you. That's exactly right. I would say it this way, that the thing that Job feared in his children was the very thing that he doggedly refrained from doing when he was suffering, when he was accused, when he was prompted to curse God. I just find it very interesting that that is the sin that the account chooses to focus on among his children, not their drunkenness, not any other immorality that may have arisen if they were indeed getting out of control on their feasts. It was cursing God. That's action. And that action is central to what Job's going to experience and what he's going to refrain from doing. And that's, as we'll see, Satan believed that Job would do that, and Job didn't do that. We'll talk about that.
Job's wife
Just a moment.
told him.
That's right.
Told him that
He didn't.
she was
Get it over with.
So let's move on. Where were they? Sons of God and Satan present themselves. We're now behind the veil, spiritually speaking, if you like. Very, very interesting kind of scenario. Where are they? Excuse me?
Before the Lord.
Yes. Yes, they are. It says so. And annoyingly, it would say so further down if I could scroll up here. Because Satan departs from the presence of God, it says at the end of this passage. So they were very clearly before the Lord. What else tells us that they weren't on earth?
Because Satan, God asked him, "Where were you?" And he says, "I was walking on the face of the earth."
Okay, I've come from. So he's been on the earth, and they're no longer in the earth. I really wanted to try to satisfy myself, and maybe, I'm not sure whether you feel this way or not, but I approached this earlier on in the study, trying to wrestle with the idea of this evil being, this evil angelic being, Satan, being in the presence of God. And I kind of wanted to try and really confirm to my own mind, and maybe I've missed something, but I can't see, I think it's almost an undeniable conclusion that he's there. And they're in the presence of God. And where is God? I mean, yes, Matthew chapter 5, the Lord's Prayer as well. I mean, our Father is in heaven. His throne is in heaven. We see these sons of God, I think from the context here, it's likely that they're angels. I think we're going to see another passage later on in Job that they're likely angels based on the context there. So to be consistent with the description of the Son of God. In this passage, it seems that we have to interpret this as angelic beings. As Mark said, we have Satan among them. Evidently, another angelic being, just one named. And it's tricky because we sometimes think about heaven as a place where there isn't evil. So what do you think about that? How do we reconcile what was being described here, where it seems undeniable that we have an evil-hearted angelic being, Satan, in the presence of God in heaven?
He is not in, it's not Judgment Day yet, so he's not been locked away.
Okay.
So, and we know that this world is his dominion, where he has rule over the power of the air.
Okay.
And recognizing that he can, maybe for us, for me, seeing that he can still stand in the presence of God, that is a powerful being that's coming against us here.
So we, again, wrestling with this is tricky. There's lots of things I willingly admit that I really don't understand about this, because we're trying to comprehend a realm that's outside of time and space. The heavenly realm is not bounded by, the sun, the moon, and the stars and time. It's not a physical realm. And it's interesting that now there was a day. So this event is described as a day. I've wrestled with this. It seems to me the best way to look at this is that we're dealing with events in the heavenly realm that are set in the context of what's going on the earth. I don't really know how to describe it any other way than that. Things are happening in time on earth, and in heaven, not necessarily bounded by time, but those events are connected to the things that are happening in time on the earth.
I was going to say, to me, that this tells me how much power God has. Because he allowed Satan to come in this meeting. And I don't know, just the way it struck me.
Yes, I think we're going to think about the relative power of Satan versus God in just a little bit. Certainly that is a good point. So, yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the things that when you get over to Job's answer, God's answer to Job, all through Job, you see human reasoning of what's just and not just, and fair and not fair. But there's a level of justice and fairness and everything that's above us.
Yes.
God's operating in a different sphere.
Yes.
And in his sphere, what's happening in that vision is completely, totally according to his purpose.
And I'm glad you said that, because that very principle about God's higher level of what is just, what is right, is something that we need to just accept in just a moment, when we look at something else. All right. Anyone want to say anything else about that? I didn't think it was worth dwelling on that thought about the presence of evil in heaven with God in this account.
I think it's kind of interesting as well. We see Satan at the beginning here. We never see him again. He doesn't pop up in the epilogue, if you will, of the final section, which is kind of interesting.
Yes, it is. These glimpses into these interactions, when they begin and end, we think of them as beginning and ending, and that's a time-bounded way of looking at things as well. And it begins to blow my mind if I spend too much time thinking about it. All right. So, who is it that directs the focus of Satan on Job?
God.
Okay. So what do you think about that? What's going on, do you think?
What it allows is for us to see a man under, experiencing suffering and adversity that we can relate to. And so that's, and when I think about Job, I think we have to think about Christ and his suffering.
We certainly do want to do that. I'd like to come back at the very end of this and very, very specifically take head-on parallels with Job and Christ and the way in which Job is a kind of model of certain aspects. But I do want to think particularly about why it is. I recognize what you're saying, Mark, is exactly right. That's the outcome, and perhaps that's part of the overall purpose. But what's going on with this idea that God is the one that directs this question to Job? What, Michael, you would say?
Well, like Danny was saying, the power that God has in this. And this goes back to the influence of Job. God says, consider my servant. And Satan already knows all about him, you know. So he's seen him as he's walking around. He has already considered him.
Yeah.
And the reason why he directs him to him is, I think God is pleased with Job and wants to show Satan, this is who I'm pleased with.
All right. I'm glad you said that, because I believe that sometimes we come to this passage and we might make a presumption that what's going on here is that God is basically setting up a bet with Satan. That God somehow is, Job is a kind of plaything, and we're going to have a bet over whether Satan's going to curse me. You will find all sorts of common interpretation of this as, Satan and God having a bet over Job and his integrity. But I don't believe that's what it is. If we presume that that's what it is, I think we're going to perhaps draw the wrong conclusions about what's going on here. Rather, as Michael said, it seems that what God is doing is he's pointing to a mere human being who demonstrates tremendous integrity, tremendous aspects of righteousness, and pointing this out to Satan, and perhaps even Satan, you could learn something from this man. You, Satan, need to be more like Job in your attitudes and devotion to me. It seems to me as a very real possibility of what's going on here, rather than some kind of vindictive God picks out Job and singles him out to have all of this terrible stuff done to him, even if it wasn't actually him doing it directly. Rather, he's highlighting what a great example of devotion to me Job is. And what does Satan do? Well, his accusations against Job, if we're looking at it like that, it might be what we do. I mean, we've been children, and so sometimes our parents don't always wisely point to another child and say, you need to be more like them. But let's say it this way, that we are encouraged in the church to either model behaviors that are like someone else, like our elders. We are to model the behavior of our elders as examples to us. And so we understand the principle of someone being set up as an example. God sets up examples all through Scripture for us to look at and to try to imitate. Paul says the same thing. So it seems to me like he could very well be saying that to Satan. Here is a man, just a mere man, who you could do well to imitate. And what does Satan do? He basically deflects. Basically he just wants to avoid the issue of his own obedience and devotion, and he's just going to impugn Job instead, which is a classic human behavior as well. If we want to deal with someone who's maybe encouraging us to do better, and we feel criticized, and we feel kind of indicted by it, we deflect sometimes as well. And so that seems a very real possibility of what's going on here, rather than some terrible, vindictive bet that's being placed on how Job's going to behave if certain things happen to him. So, as predicted, we didn't get that far, but I'm glad we went to the face we did, because I think there's lots of good things here we can talk about. So we're going to pick this up next time, where we look at what Satan asks of God. That question is where we'll pick up the study next week. Thank you so much. Right.